بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا ما علمتنا وزدنا علما. وأرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه وأدخلنا برحمتك في عبادك الصالحين آمين يا رب العالمين. أهلا وسهلا everybody. Welcome to our last part of our Halaqah series, Jerusalem's Islamic Legacy. And I want to start, inshallah, with just some review from last time. So last week, we discussed about the second opening of Jerusalem. طيب, let's start with some easy ones. Who's the one that opened Jerusalem the second time? Huh? Easy, right? ما شاء الله. تفضل. يا سلام, أحسنت. صلاح الدين Al-Ayyubi. طيب, who remembers the name of his mentor? The one who kind of laid the foundation for him to do it. Huh? نور الدين, نعم, نور الدين زنكي. نعم, نور الدين زنكي رحمه الله. And what was the famous battle? The battle of Hittin, right? Was Jerusalem conquered in the battle of Hittin? The siege after that, right? So the battle of Hittin happened outside of Jerusalem. After they won that major battle, then they laid siege to Jerusalem. جميل جدا. طيب. Let's take one lesson that we took last time from what we learned from Salah ad-Din and his mentors. يعني. What is one lesson that we learned? نعم. أحسنت. جميل جدا. It didn't happen overnight. It took time. يعني, remember, Nur ad-Din actually built the minbar, yeah, but he wasn't actually the one who brought it to Jerusalem. It was يعني Salah ad-Din after him. And even though there was some khilaf between them, يعني inshallah they're rewarded for their intention. And these things happen, يعني. These things happen. Rahimahullah ajma'in. طيب, let's start today. Today, inshallah, actually, there was so much content, and this was one of the most difficult presentations. And we said our goal today was kind of to discuss kind of from the 20th century on, what happened, the 100-year war, I guess, that's been going on, 100 plus technically, since the creation of the state of Israel. طيب. So before that, let's look quickly at kind of what has happened between. So remember now, Salah ad-Din Ayyubi opened Jerusalem in the year 1187, something like that, 1187, I believe. And so that's 12th century. So in the 13th century, a new, I guess, empire arises, which is the Mamluks. The Mamluks, who are like, anybody know who the Mamluks are? Sometimes I like to, who were the Mamluks? What does it mean, Mamluk, in Arabic? Slave, right? And so it said, it's like, these people were actually, as you know, when they have warfare, they would get slaves. And these slaves, the Muslims, yani they would be with the Muslims, they would become Muslims, they would be trained with the Muslims. And basically, over time, the Muslims got weaker and weaker, and these kind of revolted and took over. And they were called the Mamalik, or the Mamluks. So they actually ruled over Jerusalem for quite a long time, almost 300 years. When we go to the 16th century, now we have, right, the Ottoman Empire, which is really kind of technically the last Khilafah, as we will see, inshallah. Sultan Salim captured Jerusalem in 1517, and really it stays under Ottoman rule until World War I, pretty much. So we have Napoleon who tried to take it, and Napoleon actually, he wanted to make it a homeland for the Jews. Right? You'll read, some historians mention this, that he actually promised the Jews a homeland, but he obviously couldn't. He lost the battle, and he couldn't do that. That's in the 18th century. In the 19th century, we had the Crimean War. طبعا technically it was still under the Ottoman rule, but it was briefly occupied by Britain and French. This is in the really the end of the 19th century. This was known as the Crimean War. There was a war between Russia and the Ottomans. طيب, which takes us to kind of present day, excuse me. So I put here two maps just to give us an idea. Now, the map on the right, this is from Google Maps, like literally from today. This is kind of what what the Palestine looks like. You got Jordan, Syria, Syria, and Egypt. This is what it looked like under the Ottomans. Now, under the Ottomans, you didn't have these borders that we have today, right? These are post-Sykes-Picot, post-British Mandate, and etc. And so the way they had it is like in wilayat. They had wilayat. So here on the left, this is what it looked like kind of under the Ottomans, right? So you had wilayat and you had districts, sinjaq, right? And you'd have these different districts, right? And this is almost, I tried to make it kind of the same map, so you can see now how it looked like during the time of the Ottomans, طيب, جميل. طيب, I always like to have just a kind of an overview of what happens, the main events, and then kind of try to go through some of them into details, right? I had a teacher in the university in Riyadh that, subhanAllah, I still make dua for him. He always used to give us kind of an overview of what we're studying, right? Because sometimes you're studying, let's say you're studying fiqh, right? And fiqh is different stages, right? And so let's say you're in the third year and you're studying the topic, but what's that topic look like in terms of the whole map, the whole picture? Where are you now? Are you in ibadat? Are you in, mu'amalat? Are you in fiqh of usra? Where are you? What does it look like, the map? Right? So it's always nice to kind of have an overview of where you are. Why? So you can relate it to everything else. Right? طيب. So just go through quickly kind of the timeline. And some of these events you might be familiar with. Some of them you might not be familiar with. And we're going to look at this after, inshallah, to put it all together. So obviously, an important topic we're going to have to discuss is Zionism, or the Zionist state, right? And this was technically, the idea was brought in 1897. Inshallah, we're going to discuss the founder, right? We have World War I in 1917. 1917, we have the First World War, okay? Who were the two sides? Who remembers World War I? تفضل. So yeah, Ismail.
So there were the Germans, the Ottomans, versus the British, French, British and United States for sure, and then I'm pretty sure.
Was the United States in World War I?
World War I, but they had some people go.
So I believe US was in World War II. So yes, so we had the Ottomans were with who? The Ottomans were with the? With the? طيب. And then who was on the other side? The British and French. Is that right? Sisters? Any historians here? To make us look bad? طيب. We should review our notes. طيب. And then we had the famous Balfour Declaration, right? And this actually happened during the war, during the World War. And then what happened is the land of Asham kind of was under what they call the British Mandate, right? And so the League of Nations, which is now the United Nations, they used to be called the League of Nations, right? They said, you have to figure out what's going to happen with the land, so it's under your rule for a period of time, okay? And then we have, in 1947, we have the famous partition plan, the UN partition plan, and this is important to understand because it's a major event in kind of the whole narrative, which is the partition plan 181. And this is the partition plan where the UN, or I think it was UN that time, they said that we're going to do a partition between Israel and Palestine, and we'll split it almost 50-50. We'll see that it's not actually 50-50. I think it was 55% for Israel and 45% for the Palestinians. So this was, and this later caused, right, Israel to declare themselves independent in 1948. Right, which caused the war and the great disaster, the Nakba. Then we had a bunch of wars. So there was a period of multiple wars. طبعا this is a decision I had to make today. Inshallah, we're not really going to go into detail in the wars. We're going to mention them, right? But because we don't have much time, right? We have less than an hour. But we'll mention them, inshallah. So we had the 6-Day War. So the first Arab-Israeli war was in 1948. Okay. So now you kind of see the pattern here. And then we had in 1967 we had the where's my mouse? Yeah. Right. We had the 6-Day War, right? And then we had another UN resolution. 1970 we had the Yom Kippur War. 1978 Israel invaded Lebanon, and some call it the first Israeli-Lebanese war. 1979 we had the Camp David Accords. This is important because it caused a lot of, upset in the Arab world. 1982, right, the second invasion of Lebanon. 87 is the first Intifada. Intifada, anybody who can tell me what Intifada means? It's a word that's used a lot. What's an Intifada? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like it's an uprising. Yeah, an Intifada uprising, like almost like a protest or a riot, kind of a protest. Initially they would be peaceful, and then eventually they ended up being semi-violent. So that was the first Intifada in 87. 93 were the famous Oslo Accords, right? That happened at the time of Bill Clinton. And then we had another peace treaty with Jordan. And then there was a second Intifada in 2000 after a failure of a peace treaty between Yasser Arafat and the president of Israel at that time. And then, of course, 2006, this is another major event. There was an election, and the party of Hamas won the election. And then another major event that recently happened, I think all of us here were alive that time, is Mr. Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And actually, this was something that was discussed in the US cabinet long before that, maybe a decade before that. But it was kind of made public in 2017. So this is kind of like just an a macro look on kind of the main events from the beginning of the century until today. طيب. All good? So far so good? طيب, Bismillah, let's start. So the first thing that we need to discuss is the topic of Zionism. Obviously, I'd like to first kind of ask you guys, if I told you the word Zionism, what comes to your mind? Just to get you guys involved. History is not the most exciting topic, so I need to get you guys involved, inshallah. When you hear the word Zionism, what comes to mind? And even the uncles in the back, you need to get involved, inshallah. Tafadhal. Okay, he said liars. What else? When you say Zionism, Let's go through the academic part first, and then we can go through the rest. Now,
the ideology of Jewish people to have their own state.
Jamil, excellent. You put it very good. All right. So it's an ideology that started in the 19th century, right? And the main person kind of that made it popular, right? What's his name? Yeah, Theodor Herzl, right? Theodor Herzl. And remember that these are all European Jews, right? These are all European Jews. That, طبعا, if you, on Sunday, inshallah, I'm doing a kind of a workshop on the history of Bani Israel. When you read their history, they were thrown around everywhere, right? And as you'll see later, World War II and other things happened. And so a lot of them wanted a homeland, a place they can call home. طبعا, it wasn't just about homeland, because you'll see later that they were offered different lands, but they refused them. Right? They wanted specifically where, right? The land of Zion, they call it, right? The land of Zion, which goes technically from the, Euphrates River all the way to from the river to the sea, right? Now, No, Zion is just the name of the land, like that land of It's not a person. I don't know anybody. Do you know someone called? No, I don't know anybody else. So it's kind of the land. That's what they call it in Hebrew. طيب. Jamil. So it's a Jewish national movement, a nationalist movement, established in 1897 by Theodor Herzl. Now, they would start to have meetings, right? And they would spread their idea, right? And I think their first meeting was in Basel, right? And they would meet, and a lot of them were wealthy, powerful men, right? You had the family of the Rothschilds involved, a very powerful family. I believe one of the wealthiest families today, the Rothschilds family. And actually, he was one of the ones that funded a lot of the settlements. Before all this happened, even before the Balfour Declaration, he was one of the main people that funded those movements, those migrations. So obviously their main goal is the creation of a Jewish state, but not anywhere. And it can't be in Argentina, right? It can't be in Uganda, right? They were offered Uganda by the British. They said, no, we don't, what are we going to do in Uganda? We want that specific land, right? Now what's the problem? There's already people living there. Right? I know I'm kind of sounding like duh, but people sometimes skip all of this, right? There's people living there, right? And you hear sometimes like, I was watching once the interview of Jordan Peterson with Netanyahu, right? And he was saying, there was a lot of the Israelis, they say this, that there wasn't really many people there. There weren't really inhabitants there. It was not just Arabs, it was different people. The land was empty, it was undeveloped. We just came and fixed it, we were doing them a favor. They make it sound like, there was nobody there. Yani takhalluf, there was absolute disaster. No, of course, there was people there. There were farmers there for a long time, sophisticated people. Yes, they didn't have an army because they were under the Ottoman Empire, but there were people there, they were living fine, and they had their own life. طيب. So their main goal was the creation of the Jewish state. And this is taken from one of his papers or articles. He strives to create for the Jewish people a home in Palestine. And it was very clear from the beginning. They wanted a home in Palestine. And one thing you'll notice about this movement is that a lot of the times they'll publicly say something, but their goal is different, right? And you'll see that in the Balfour Declaration. And Taban, actually, if you read in the history books, they actually tried to buy that land, okay, during the Ottomans, right? And Sultan Abdul Halim, he said, no, this is a waqf of the Muslims. What's a waqf? What's a waqf when I say waqf? Yeah, you cannot sell it, right? This is like an endowment for the Muslims, right? And so sometimes you'll see like these mushafs, that's a waqf. You can't take it, right? You'll see, مثلا, someone donated a chair for the masjid. Yeah, I can't just be like, here, you take it. You can take it home. Yeah, so it's a waqf. Yeah, it's not allowed to be given out, not allowed to be sold. So he said, I can't sell you Jerusalem. This is a waqf for the Muslims. Subhanallah. طيب. And so the designers then went to Britain, right? And Britain offered them a land in Uganda. They said, we don't want that. We want a home in Palestine. Okay, so that's kind of the Zionist movement. It grew, and one of the things about them is that really, like you see one of the main powers of I guess the Zionist movement now is what? What's one of the main powers? Lobbying, right? Lobbying is a huge industry, right? Huge industry. And you'll see, subhanAllah, it started, how much lobbying these people did from back then. They would be planning and lobbying and talking to different people and different prime ministers and people in high positions, right? To have their goal achieved. You have to give it to them. They worked really hard. And they did a lot of lobbying, a lot of work, just so they can get that land. طيب. Some important kind of vocab to understand. You hear the word Jewish, Israeli, or Sahyuni, or Zionist, right? What's the difference between them? Are they all the same? Let's just, inshallah, if that's one benefit we can get out of today, this is important, terminology. When I say Jewish, what do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? Basic, easy. It's not a tricky question. Fadl. Yeah, someone who follows the Jewish tradition. Yeah, someone who follows the Jewish tradition. طيب, when I say Israeli, what do I mean by that? People who live in Israel, جميل. طبعا, you can look at it from the technical old definition. In Israeli, someone from who? From Bani Israel, right? And Israeli, some technically, يعني, if you go back to the original definition, someone from Bani Israel. Who's Israel? Israel is Yaqub, right? And Yaqub had 12 children, right? And from those, so technically Yusuf alayhi salam, Binyamin, and his 10 brothers, right? That's Bani Israel right there. So those 12 children are Bani Israel, and everybody that came from them is Bani Israel. So when you hear Ya Bani Israel, Ya Bani Israel, those are Bani Israel. Tamam. Now, is every Jewish person from Bani Israel? No, right? Are the people in Israel now, or in Palestine right now, who live in that occupied land, are they Israeli from a blood point of view, all of them? No, maybe some of them. There could be some of them. But when you read through their history, like the Jews were kind of two kinds, right? You had the Ashkenazi Jews and you had the Sephardic Jews, right? And the Sephardic ones are the kind of the original ones. And they're less in number. They're very few, right? And Wallahu A'lam, most of them in the occupied lands are not technically bloodline, right? A lot of them are just Europeans. You see them from their names, right? Europeans from different countries in Europe. And then when we say the word Zionist, we talked about Zionism, right? And we said a Zionist, does it have to be a Jewish person that's a Zionist? No. So a lot of Christians, right? Evangelical Christians, they support the Zionist movement, right? Why would they support that? Naam. And what are they waiting for? What are the evangelicals waiting for? The Christians. Yeah, they're waiting for Isa, right? And alayhi salam. And the Yahud are also waiting for, right, the Messiah, right? And so, and what has to happen? The establishment of the land of Jerusalem has to happen, or the land of Zion. طيب, جميل. Okay, cool. We covered that. Ya salam. جميل جدا. طيب, so now طبعا World War I takes place, right? And the Ottomans are defeated. And subhanAllah, it's a good thing to, or place to kind of mention that really when you look at our history, like it was that time that was like the end of the Khilafah. The Islamic Khilafah, it ended at that time because that was the last Khilafah standing from the Muslims. So when, what's his name, General Allenby entered, right? And basically took over, I guess, Sham area, Palestine, right? That was kind of the end. Like the subhanAllah, it's a sad moment, it's a sad time, right? But we know that the Khilafah will come back after, for sure, under the Mahdi. So that was the end of the Khilafah. In 1917, right? The World War happens. And then when the war ends, the League of Nations, now technically speaking, when you study history, there was a long period of what? Of colonialism, right? What's colonialism? What's colonialism? When you go back to your history classes, I know your brain is like, oh, I remember that class 10 years ago. What's colonialism? Ismail is the only history student. يتفضلي. Yeah, you. Yeah, so countries like Britain, right? France, right? Germany, Spain, they would go and basically just take over lands. Yeah, and they take all the resources, massacre people, right? Like technically, like Canada, this is the land of the Canadian people are from where originally? Europeans. Yeah, the Canadians are technically Europeans, right? There's native people that had to be, right, pushed over. Same with the United States. So all of this is colonialism. Now, colonialism technically ended at that time. But when you see, inshallah, when you see the history, يعني what's happening in Palestine is another form of colonialism, right? And you'll see patterns similar to when we talked about the crusade battles, the crusades, right? Very similar things that happen, very similar things, right? So it's a good kind of to keep those things in mind, right? Yes, the old school colonialism, يعني, kind of disappeared during that time, okay? But still, and you still see it nowadays. طيب. So let's talk about the Balfour Declaration, okay? Who's Balfour? Who's this guy? This is a guy. Yeah. Zion's not a guy, but this Balfour is a guy. Who's Balfour? Who's Balfour? نعم تفضل. Yeah, so that's a good thing you mentioned that, because many people don't know that. Now, when he signed this agreement with them, he was not prime minister, but he was prime minister before that, right? So in, I think, 1903, 1905 or something like that, he was the prime minister. And so he had a lot of connections. And طبعا remember I told you that the Zionist movement was very active. A lot of lobbying, a lot of research, and favors and different things were taking place. And so when they went to the British, eventually they were able to have an agreement with Lord Balfour to kind of give them a land, to promise them a land, right? Now, this is a problem in many ways. طبعا there's already people living there, okay? And at the same time, there's another British man who had promised somebody else that land. Anybody know who I'm talking about? So there was a man by the name of Lawrence of Arabia. Have you heard of that name before? There was a movie made about him, right? And so, and so he was actually sent as like a spy, informant, whatever you want to call him. And he would actually live with the Arab tribes, in the Najd area, with the Saudis. I mean, there was no Saudis, but in the Hijaz, Najd area. And he would live with the Bedouins, and he would learn their language and their style. And basically the British wanted him to get information, and also he wanted them for the Sharif of Mecca and the people in Hijaz to go against who? Against the Ottomans. So they wanted them to go against their Muslim brothers, the Ottomans. Now, the people in mostly Najd, they did not like the Ottomans, because the Ottomans did not really support them too much. But even in Hijaz. So what happened? They agreed, but they told them, they said, if you go against the Ottomans, we promise you and your sons, the Sharif of Mecca, we promise you and your sons like a new Khilafah in the Sham area, right? And he would promise his sons, and طبعا from his progeny is where now? Right now, one of the countries, the Arab countries, Jordan, right? So the king of Jordan, he's a Hashemite, he's from Hijaz, and he's one of the sons, or the sons of the sons, right, of the Sharif. There was another one who was promised land in Iraq, I believe, and another one in Palestine. But did he actually get it? No, because they basically promised two people, right? So that was one of the biggest problems. طيب. So there was a public statement issued by the British government during World War I, and now something interesting about this is that طبعا all the main important people were at the war, right? And so passing something like this is not very hard. The main I guess MPs and government people were not there. They were busy with the war. And the country is at war now, it's a world war. And so passing this was not a big deal, right? And so this was issued by the British government during World War, announcing its support for this establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, right? And as we mentioned, that he was a prime minister before, and this is the declaration. I just put it there because there's something important to read there. I can't read it from here, it's too small. Let me see if I can read it from. So it says here, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. So it says here, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. So look what it says here, view the favor, the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Right, so this is important to understand, because this is clearly saying that, you can go there and have a homeland, but as long as what? What does it say here? Nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Who's that? The Palestinians, the Muslims and the Christians that were living there already. Or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you bring this declaration to knowledge to the Zionist Federation, right? And it's signed there. This is November, was it November 2nd? 1917. So even there initially, they would say that, oh, we just want a place, a homeland, tamam. But what's the real intention? What's in their scriptures? What's the real intention? Is to take the whole land from the get-go, right? And now you see the real intention come to fruition, right? From the get-go, they wanted to take the whole land, and this is important to understand that really their main goal is to take the whole land. So now if they say, oh, we agree, we recognize, Gaza as an autonomous, self-determined state. Yeah, for now, until they come, and their intention is to take it over. Wallahu a'lam, their intention is to go even beyond that. Tamam? طيب. And so really when people talk about peace treaties, how can you have a peace treaty, okay, when you have one side that wants to take the whole land? And it's not even your land. And it goes against any logic. طيب. So we talked about the British mandate. Let's speed up a bit. So like you said, the League of Nations approves the British mandate for the Palestinians, and its purpose is to help establish a Jewish homeland. Tamam? To help establish a Jewish homeland. The objective was to provide administrative advice and assistance by a mandatory until such time as they are able to stand alone. Just to help them kind of come to the land, settle in, have their own homeland. طبعا the land is huge already, and I don't have the map here, but the British mandate stretches outside of the land of Palestine. You have also Transjordan and other areas. طيب. طبعا we didn't mention the Sykes-Picot Agreement, but the Sykes-Picot Agreement, what was that? This is an important event that happened. What was the Sykes-Picot Agreement? Who can tell us? In summary, the Sykes-Picot Agreement. British and French. Naam, literally they came over the Ottoman land and over the map, and they said this is for the British, this is for the English. They just split it up. And they put borders basically. This is your land, this is our land, and assigned it to each other. طيب. Jamil. So this is a census from the British mandate in 1922. We're talking about 1922 now. This is just a few years after World War I, right? 78% of the people in that land were Muslims. 11% were Jewish, right? So there was a decent population of Jews that had already migrated. That was not, there was a large influx of them that had migrated by this time. This is post Balfour Declaration. 9.6% Christians, 1.4% Druze. طيب. So you can see they're about 10% by 1922. Still not a major. نعم تفضل. It's hard to say, but a large percent of them migrated after a large percent of them migrated because of the idea of the Zionist state. Now, but there was Jewish people living there before, right? There was Jewish people living under the Ottomans and before that. طيب. And remember, like Umar al-Khattab brought them back in, Salah ad-Din Ayyubi brought them back in, right? He allowed them to live there, right? Versus the Christians, They massacred them and they exiled them. طيب. So when they actually came in, they didn't come to just sit and relax, right? They have a plan. It's a vision. And so they came and they came prepared. A lot of them were in the armies. A lot of them were with the British, with the French, right? And so one of the first things they developed is what they call the Haganah, right? Which is kind of like a military force, like a military, which later became what? What's the Israeli, the IDF, right? Which later became the IDF, right? The Israeli Defense Force. So originally they were called the Hagan, and these guys, as they mentioned, they said it was an underground Zionist military organization established to defend Jewish interests in Palestine. To defend Jewish interests. So whatever they need to get done, it will get done. And there's an interesting book that I recommend you read. It's called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pape, and who is an Israeli historian, right? It's called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. And he goes into detail. He goes through Israeli archives, and he goes into detail talking about exactly how they were trained. They would be trained on how to enter a Palestinian village, what time to enter, how to enter it, how to talk to them, and how to take it down in a set amount of time. They were trained to do that, right? And so it was not just random. These guys were trained. And these were trained, and they had weapons, right? They would be supplied. And a lot of the farmers in Palestine, they were fighting with their farming forks. They're not really combatants or fighters. So they were highly trained and would use force and aggression during riots. Riots would happen when a large number of Jewish immigrants would enter. A large number, huge, and they would have a settlement, right? And so a lot of riots would happen, and these guys would use force to kind of settle them down, do arrests. And when you read about the British mandate, they were really biased towards the Zionists, very biased, right? And you will see in the book he mentions, Ilan Pape, that they would disarm the Palestinians. They would arrest them, exile them, and they would equip the Zionists, the Israelis, with weapons. They would actually supply them with weapons. From the Haganah, there was another militant force called the Irgun, right? And these guys were 10 times as aggressive as them, right? Which was a Zionist paramilitary organization that operated in Mandate Palestine and then Israel between 1931 and 1948. And there was a lot of massacres, attacks, assassinations done. It was done by who? By these guys, by the Irgun, right? And like I said, this is an offshoot of the Haganah, and this is what the founder of it, or the general of them, Jabotinsky, he says every Jew had the right to enter Palestine. Only active retaliation would deter the Arabs. Only active retaliation would deter the Arabs. Only Jewish armed force would ensure the Jewish state, right? And so it was very clear that they were going to be very aggressive to get their land. It was not going to be like, oh, just give us a nice piece of land, we'll live happily ever after. No, they wanted to get rid of all the Arab, right? And you'll see later in 48, almost 900,000 are exiled Palestinians. Is there a question?
So basically, these militant groups were only allowed there because the British mandate allowed them. What would happen if the British didn't allow them?
I mean, they were supporting them. Yeah, and really, if you want to play the blame game, right? The British played a big role, right? And you'll see later they just walked away and said to the UN, "Here, you deal with it," right? And so they caused this big mess. They brought a group of people, a lot of them. They weaponized them. They gave them positions. They weakened the other side, who were the majority of the people there, and then they left. And I mean, the Zionists played a big role in getting them out of there, because they did not want them to be there. Even though they were biased towards them, they didn't give them everything they wanted, right? And you'll see later that they actually limited the influx of them. If you see here, this is what the British mandate looked like. So all this, right, was under the British mandate. And you can see here, this is a map by the Irgun that was that was shared at that time. What does this look like? Huh? From the from the river to the sea. That's basically what the land that they have envisioned for Zion, right? All the way from exactly like this one, from the Euphrates River all the way to the sea, right? And so really that is their goal. They don't publicize it as much, but really that is their goal. And if you read this book that I told you, Ethnic Cleansing by Ilan Pape, he goes into Israeli archives with phone calls, meetings, everything is there, documented. And like I said, he's an Israeli historian. طيب. Quotes by Ben Gurion, the first prime minister, and other officials in those positions during that time. طيب. So obviously now, if you remember, World War II takes place when? When is World War II? Brothers in the back. When was World War II? Huh? 1998? No, I don't. Yeah, 39? Huh? Yeah, nah, around that time, right? So Hitler comes to power in 1933, right? And you have the whole, I guess, a lot of Jews were being persecuted in Europe, right? Now in 1931, there was 1 million, Jews in the land of Palestine. 1 million. This is in 1931. A lot of migration happened after the Balfour Declaration, which made them about 16.9%. Now, 1933, 30,000 Jews come to Palestine. 1934, 42,000 come to Palestine. This is all during the persecution of them in Europe. 1935, 61,000, right? So huge numbers were coming. Huge numbers. Right? If you add them all together, I mean, you're talking about, it's a big number, right? What is that? 1.1, almost like 1.13 or something. طيب. So from 1900 to 1939, Zionist colonies in Palestine increased from 22 to 200. From 22 to 200. All this is before 1948, because 1948 is a big date, right? 1948 is a big date, as you will see. But all of this is happening, right, before 1948. From 22 to 200 settlements, that's a 100% increase. From 1922 to 1939, Jewish landholding, went from 148,000 acres to 338,000 acres. That's a 250% increase. From 1918 to 1939, Jewish population in Palestine increased from 60,000 to almost 500,000. Look how huge the population increased in just, 20 years? 18, 29, 39. 20 years. 20 years, 700% increase of their population. So this is not, this is well planned. And this is a well-planned project. It's a huge project. تمام. طبعا the founder of this, Herzl, he's dead by now. 1906 or 1907, he's dead by now. Yeah. But remember, we talked about, this is a lesson that we should learn. We talked about it with Salah ad-Din, that you're responsible for the niyyah and for the effort, and you shouldn't be so obsessive to have that result happen in your lifetime. Because that's just how the sunnah of life is, right? Some things take time. And the person who planted the seed gets all the ajr, inshallah. Tamam? For example, like this masjid, the people who are building this masjid, right? Inshallah, for every salah, they're taking the ajr. Maybe they died, they never saw the expansion that took place here, but they get that reward, inshallah. And so, you see that this was very well planned. So, up to 1939, the Jewish population was only 28% of the total population in Palestine. Why is this important? Because you're going to see now, when we get to the partition plan, right, they're offered more than half the land, even though they're not even close to half the population, right? And you'll hear this a lot of Israelis. They'll say, "Oh, the Arabs did not agree the partition plan. The Arabs did not agree on the partition plan." Right? And when you see the partition plan, who would agree to that? Why would you agree to something like that? Somebody comes to your home, takes your living room, your bedroom, the bathroom, and gives you the basement, and there are only two people, and you're like a family of 20. Would you agree to that? Of course you would not agree to that, right? You would be a fool to agree to that. طيب. So there's a white paper in 1930. What's a white paper, by the way? Anybody heard that term before? So this is like a government document that would be sent by the British, right? So this was one document that was sent in 1939, right? So they were kind of like just a checkup on their objectives and the mandate. So the Balfour Declaration that we talked about, it was already achieved. It was already achieved. The whole point of the Balfour Declaration was what? Just to have a homeland for the Jewish people. They have a homeland. They actually own land there, and it was achieved. Indefinite Jewish immigration and land transfer to the Jew were contrary to the Article 22 of the Covenant of the League of Nations and British promises to Arabs. What's he talking about, Article 22? Anybody here heard about this Article 22? Right, this Article 22 of the League of Nations, this is before United Nations, is that those countries, remember we said that the colonialism was ending at that time, and they were giving kind of every country in that place that they have the right for sovereignty, right, a right for independence for their own land. And so this was part of the article of the League of Nations, and the Arabs, they were ignored. They had the right to have that land just for them, independent of them. But because of the Balfour Declaration, it was kind of ignored. So within 5 years, only 75,000 Jews would be allowed into Palestine. So now the British started cutting down on the migration, right? Because the Balfour Declaration it's been done. The promise has been done. Okay, so only 75,000 Jews would be allowed into Palestine. And then after 1944, Jewish migration is subject to Arab approval. So they were not allowed to just keep coming, because that was their goal, right? Their goal was to just bring as many people as possible, right? But the British, they kind of put a halt to that. They said only 75,000 Jews would be allowed, and anything more than that after 1944, they have to be approved by who? By the locals, by the locals. طبعا would the Zionists like that? Of course not. So an independent Palestinian state will be considered in the next 10 years. This is a part of the white paper from the British mandate. The Zionist organization was enraged, so the Zionists did not like that. What do you mean you can't bring more people, right? And they assassinated the person who brought this, right? Lord Moyne in November 1944. And you'll see this is a pattern. Even one of their prime ministers they assassinated, right? After one of the agreements that happened in 1993. Right? And subhanAllah, even if you read about them in the Quran, what was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned about them, Bani Israel? They would kill prophets. وَيَقْتُلُونَ الْأَنْبِيَاء بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ. They would kill prophets, right? And so this is something that goes back years. Yeah, they talk about their land years, but also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about what they used to do before, right? طيب. So now we go to the partition plan. This is the first. So now the UN, the British are gone. Khalas, pack their bags. Assalamu alaikum. Here you go, UN. You have a nice problem to deal with. Yeah, good luck. So now the UN. طبعا the UN, this is new. Like they have never really done this before. The people who were put in charge of this were not even qualified. Yeah, how do you settle this problem? So I don't know which genius came up with this plan, right? But they said that, so this partition plan 181, UN resolution 181, it called for the partition of Palestine into Arab and Jewish states, with the city of Jerusalem as a separate entity to be governed by a special international regime. Because Jerusalem is the main problem, that's the main area that they were going to fight for. So according to the UN census, the Arabs were 1.269, so 1.2 million, right? And the Jews were how much? 678,000. The Jews owned less than 10% of the land. Okay, so they owned how much? Less than 10% of the land. However, the Jews were allotted with 55%. So this partition plan said, for the minority, you get 55%. And for the majority people, you get what? 45%. طيب. Who would agree to that? يعني, who would, in their right mind, would agree to that, right? And so when someone says the Palestinians did not agree for the partition plan, why would they agree? Does anybody have a different opinion here? Would you agree to something like this? You would never agree to something like that because it's absolutely unfair. Absolutely unfair, right? If had they made it مثلا 90%, 10%, and right, this is what it would have looked like. This is what it would have looked like, right? The Jewish states are in green here, and the Arab states would be in orange. The Arab state would be in orange. Tamam. So this is kind of what it was before the partition plan, right? Right. The majority here, the Jewish settlements are just these orange. And look at the land that the Jewish. This is just 10%, right? And then comes the UN and says, okay, let's solve the problem, right? Let's give the guys who have 10% here of the land, let's give them 55%, right? So obviously there's something happening here. Either the people who are doing this are absolutely ignorant, or there was some lobbying taking place here, obviously, right? And so, طبعا this partition plan is all the Arab countries refuse it, and then Israel decides to what? Declare independence. And so in 1948, Israel declared itself an independent state. And this was a very bold and a very kind of, it kind of shook everybody. It shook the Arab world, right? They declared themselves an independent state. Tamam? And technically, if they're following this, they would have 55%. So technically, they're saying we are a state with 55% of the land. Okay, even though the partition plan was not accepted by the locals, who have more right. They have more right upon the land. So they declare independence, and then this leads to what? The first Arab-Israeli war, right? And then you have Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Urdun, Jordan. All of them get involved, right? This is, it's a huge war. And طبعا, I said I'm not going to go too much into detail of the war, but the Arab nations were defeated, and you will see that Israel actually gained way more land than the 55%. Okay, these things are important to understand about this conflict because a lot of the peace negotiations that took place after the issue was this issue. Okay, let's go back to are you going to go back and discuss the initial partition that was the initial land that was split? Okay, Israel says no, whatever happened after these wars, this is ours, خلاص, تمام? Which is technically illegal land under the UN resolution. طيب, so let's talk about ethnic cleansing. If I asked you now, what is ethnic cleansing? Who can tell me? What is ethnic cleansing? You hear this word a lot, تمام? And it was made popular kind of in the 1990s. تفضل.
So it's when there's a religion or a culture or something and you try to completely kind of take it out.
Wipe them out, yeah? So you come to Calgary, yeah? You say, okay, I don't like the Libyans. Okay, any Libyans here? I like Libya. I'm born in Libya. So you say the Libyans, we don't like them. They cause too much trouble. Yeah, let's get rid of them. We get rid of all the Libyans. Get them out of it. That would be called what? A type of ethnic cleansing. طبعا what would happen historically is much more aggressive, right? Because no one's just gonna get up and leave. تمام. And so as mentioned, in his book Ilan Pape, he defines the term. And he goes into detail, so much detail, on how what happened in 1948, okay, the great disaster of the Nakba, was a clear example of ethnic cleansing. And this point has to be made very clear, right? Because a lot of the people who kind of discuss this conflict nowadays, right, they ignore all these things that Israel committed, right? And when you talk to them about it, They're like, oh no, nothing happened. What did they say? They say the Palestinians voluntarily got up and left. Yani, who's going to believe that, right? They said they voluntarily got up and they left, right? And actually in his book he mentions that some of them were actually told that you can leave and you can come back, right? And of course they were not able to come back. They were not able to come back. طيب. So ethnic cleansing is the mass expulsion or killing of members of an unwanted ethnic or religious group in a society. And as you know, the Nakba, right? Which means that the disaster or the catastrophe, right? Up to 900,000 Palestinians, right, were expelled. Almost 1 million. And you know what's interesting? Like, you have to, when you read history, you have to kind of find patterns, right? This is happening just after what? What just happened before 1948? World War II. And what was the main topic of World War II? What are you taught about all the time? Now, the Holocaust. Yeah, so you taught about the Holocaust and how millions of Jews were killed and persecuted, and right. And then you have the same people coming and doing the same thing. Subhanallah, right? The same people who this happened to them, they're coming and they're doing the same thing, right? And you will see in the book, if you have time to read it, he will mention multiple massacres that took place. They would go to villages, when the men would go to work, go and basically massacre the children and the women and just throw them in the well. They go different villages, different massacres, all documented. Yeah, this is all documented from Israeli documents that this historian discusses. طيب. So now we have this period of wars, right? So the 48 war takes place. Now what comes into power is the PLO. Who's the PLO? The Palestinian Liberation, yeah, طيب. Jamil. And of course it's founded in Cairo by the Arab League. Right? And their goal, right, the PLO states its goal is the destruction of Israel through armed struggle and restoration of an independent Palestinian state. Because remember now, after, I didn't show you guys the map, but after the 1948 war, right, a lot of the land was taken, right? Majority of the land was taken by Israel. And parts of even, as you'll see now in 67, parts of Egypt, right, and parts of Jordan. طيب. After that, we have the 6-Day War in 1967, literally a 6-day war, right? We have Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, and of course, as you know, they were defeated, and more land was captured by Israel. More land was captured by Israel. Another war that took place was in 1973, Yom Kippur War. And then we have a major event in 1979. Anybody know who this guy is? The Egyptians know. So this is Anwar Sadat, right? And in 1979, Begin, which was the prime minister at that time, and subhanAllah, something interesting that the author mentions in the book is that a lot of these guys who became prime ministers were the ones who were entering villages and doing the massacres. Like literally, if you took what they did, they would be, and they were on wanted list of the British mandate. And under the British mandate, they were on a wanted list. And then later they're what? And they're prime ministers. Yeah, Ben Gurion and Begin and others like him. They became prime ministers. So here, Begin, Israel's prime minister, and Anwar Sadat, Egypt's president, signed the Camp David Accord. Now, what was the accord? Israel, they had taken the Sinai Peninsula, right, in one of those wars. And so Egypt wanted it back. And so the agreement was, we'll give it back to you, right, as long as you recognize it as a state and we have a peace between us. It was agreed, and Egypt becomes the first Arab country to recognize Israel, right? As you have to understand these when you see now some countries are hesitant to do anything. You have to understand that there was treaties being made, and Israel was very strategic in making these treaties so they can focus on one area, right, inside, right, and they don't have all these battles to take care of. What happened to Anwar Sadat after this? Huh? Assassinated. He was assassinated. SubhanAllah. It's a crazy world we live in. طيب, we're almost done. So now you have, right, from 87 on, you have a lot of revolts, and then you have a lot of peace talks. Tamam? So now you've seen what happened. Israel now has majority of the land after those wars. In 87, there's what we call the first intifada. So al-intifada, basically it's an uprising, right? Palestinians, they just had strikes, just like you do strikes here, right? طبعا, where are the Palestinians right now? West Bank and Gaza. يعني literally after those wars, the Palestinians, most of them were where? They were pushed in the West Bank and Gaza. And so what you see today is again, it's much smaller than it was before, right? Especially in the West Bank. But this is kind of what it's been for a couple of decades. Tamam? So they start to do these intifadas in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And then, of course, the Israelis, they throw gas, bullets, live rounds. And in the book, he mentions that the one in charge of the IDF at that time, he would tell them, if anybody throws anything, you will break their bones. Little children, just break their bones, no mercy. It's not just like a peaceful riot, some gas, go, whatever it takes. And of course, at this time now, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin creates Hamas from the Gaza wing of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. Then in 1993, we have what they were called the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords. Oslo is where? Huh? Yeah, mashallah. Ismail, mashallah. You're going to be a historian. Oh, you were born in Norway. Okay, khalas. In Oslo. طيب. mashallah. So Oslo, so it was called Oslo Declaration of Principles, right? The PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and Israel agreed to recognize each other. This was like a big step under Bill Clinton. Right, so you have on your left here Yitzhak Rabin, and like I said, he was in the military as well. And they agreed this peace treaty. And what happened to our friend on the left? He was assassinated. And it's known who was assassinated. I forgot his name, but it was a Zionist. He was an extreme Zionist who did not. Obviously, this is gonna put a halt to their plan of taking over all of the Holy Land, and so he was assassinated after that. So this takes us to kind of the 21st century, right? In 2000, there was a summit in Camp David between the Prime Minister at that time, Ehud Barak, and Yasser Arafat, right? Who's in charge of the PLO. And طبعا, see, the main thing about the PLO is they wanted to go back to 48. They wanted to go back to 48. Israel are like, no. And so a lot of these peace summits or agreements, a lot of the times it's just Israel, they would be told, how can we solve this problem? And the Palestinians would be kind of just ignored. Tamam? And so this time, Arafat kind of refuses to accept the proposal. Right? And this angers the Israelis. And then there's a riot. What happens? Ariel Sharon, right? He goes to visit the temple in Jerusalem, right? And this was a big thing for them. And this led to the second Intifada, the riots, right? The peaceful riots. 2006 takes us to another landmark, which was the UN, the US. They said, okay, well, let's have elections, right? Let's have elections. And something that surprised many people is that Hamas actually agreed to go into the elections, right? Hamas did not want to initially, but they had agreed to go into elections and let the Palestinians have a democratic vote, right? And so Hamas ends up winning, right, with 44% of the votes. And Ismail Haniyeh becomes the new prime minister. Ismail Haniyeh becomes the new prime minister. Who's the president? Mahmoud Abbas, right? Now, the thing about Hamas, that where are they mainly focused in? in Gaza, right? They're mainly in Gaza. So remember we talked about like unity and so one of the issues that you'll see, I don't want to get into too much politics, but one of the issues that you see is that there is no unity between the Muslims. One of the issues that you see is that there's no unity between the Muslims. Yani regardless of Hamas or whoever, you have the Muslims in the West Bank and the Muslims in Gaza, they're not on the same page, right? And so you will never have any kind of power or resistance or victory if you're not on the same page. Tamam? And so this is something that that has to happen. It has to happen. We saw it with Salah ad-Din, we saw it before with Umar al-Khattab. These things have to happen. If they don't happen, if there is no unity, okay, you are not able to take on your opponent. طيب. So obviously, and here's the funny thing, Israel said let them have election. The US said let them have an election. Democracy, right? This is what they push for, right? And then they were surprised Hamas won, right? And so they didn't like it, right? And then so Israel says, okay, these guys are terrorists. Okay, so they tried everything. They tried democracy, they tried this, right? And what's interesting is that Hillary Clinton, she said, basically said that we should have rigged the election. One mistake that the US did is they didn't rig the election. It was a fair election, and I think it was Jimmy Carter at that time who was the president, right? And he later wrote a book about, and he called it an apartheid, right? And so Hillary Clinton, she says, I do not think we should have pushed for an election in the Palestinian territories. I think that was a big mistake, and if we were going to push for an election, then we should have made sure that we did something to determine who was going to win. What does that sound like? Yeah. So basically, she said we should have rigged the election. We should have just put someone who, subhanAllah, and this is what happened historically. Then we had a bunch of operations where the Gazans were attacked by the Israelis. We don't have time to go through them one by one, but you can see here that and that's why what's happening right now, subhanAllah, it's way more than all these. All these together, how many? Yeah, these are 2008, 9, 2012, and all of us lived through these, or most of us here lived through these. 2014, right? All these end up 6,400. What is the death toll right now? We're up to 11,000, almost double that, subhanAllah. And so what the people of Gaza are going through right now is something that they didn't go through in 20, how many years? From 2008, and all the way from 2008, 10, 15 years they didn't go through, right? All in like 3 weeks, subhanAllah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them patience, inshallah. And one thing that is important to note, and this caused a lot of anger in the Muslim world, is that Mr. Trump, before he left, he wanted to leave his mark. So December 6th, President Trump formally recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and stated that the American embassy would be moved from Tel Aviv, because Tel Aviv was the capital, right? And he said that the embassy would be moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, right? So this angered many Muslims. And a lot of the Palestinians, they said, khalas now, this is obvious bias, and this disqualifies the US, because the US was one of the main mediators in the peace talks. And so, Allahu alam, what happens after that? This is what I should have shown before, right? And so you see here, like, the Palestinians had the majority of the land, right? After the wars that we mentioned, the 67 war, the 48 war, now you have Israel actually this is the partition plan. Sorry, this is the partition plan. After the war, okay, Israel has taken all this land. You see here, this is from the lands that was kind of the West Bank and a few more towns and cities, and you have here Gaza, right? And as you can see here, they would keep taking land, put settlements. They would start taking settlements, shway, one by one. And so somebody might say, well, why do Palestinians have to attack? Why do they have to just stay where they are and just agree and have their own peaceful state? Well, they can't, because what's the goal of Israel? Is to take over. And so they will keep putting settlements, right? And you'll see these like weird big tanks in the middle of nowhere. This is a settlement, right? They'll go there and they'll take and subhanAllah, it's a difficult situation for the Palestinians. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them victory. My goal from this presentation was just to kind of give us a brief history of what has happened, what has led to here. Why? Because You might say, well, okay, that was just يعني history lesson. But this is, يعني you are playing part in helping our brothers and sisters by educating yourself. By educating yourself, you are able to empower yourself. And by educating yourself, you are able to educate others. Yeah, and I'm telling you, a lot of the people don't know the history. They don't know what happened. They don't know the massacres that took place. They don't know about the expulsion of 900 Palestinians, just like that, right? In a year or so, almost a million, right? And then they say the Arabs are anti-Semitic, and it's a lot of jargon and language without any real history behind it. That's all I wanted to go through. Maybe let's grab 3 lessons we can get, inshallah, from what we took today, and then I'll let you guys go, inshallah. What are 3 lessons we can take? Now, let's hear from people who never talked. The ones sitting on the pillars and relaxing. Huh? From the sisters. What's a lesson that we can learn? Ya salam. The Muslims have to be united. Labud. Yani, you saw, like, numbers don't matter. 6 countries against one small, occupying country, and they were defeated because they were not on the same page. Well, we don't have time to go through it, but you'll see that they were, even if they were united, they were not united on the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were not united, and so who did you seek victory from, right? And subhanAllah, like when you read about the state of the Muslims at that time, you will see that they were very far from the deen. Yeah, there was one guy, he was saying that in the 70s, close to the I think the invasion of the first Lebanese war, he said, in that time, my wife was the only one that had a headscarf, in our town. Yeah, my wife was the only one. This is a Muslim country, subhanallah. And so, sometimes you look at the Muslims, you're like, oh, subhanallah, we're so weak. But there's a huge difference that from that time, right? People did not care. We had secularism. We had a lot of movements. People left their deen. People did not even look like Muslims, tamam, in the Muslim lands. And so, unity is a big lesson. And also going back to the deen, from what I said, you have to go back to the deen. You have to go back to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you do that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you victory. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that when you obey Allah and the Messenger, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا. The obedience of Allah and the Messenger, okay, will lead to unity. And the opposite is true. The disobedience of Allah and the Messenger will what? The disobedience of Allah and the Messenger is basically you going away from the deen. And that will lead to what? To disunity. And that's what we saw, and that's what we have seen in this whole time, a lot of disunity, because subhanAllah, they were the majority. There wasn't many Jewish people at that time, and a lot of Zionists that time, right? And they weren't able to fight them off, right? Another lesson we can take. Tfaddal.
We need to learn as Muslims how to defend ourselves and how to have like goals and vision, just like our enemies have goals and vision.
Naam, Jameel, this is an excellent lesson. We saw how the Zionist movement started with a vision. And it's not just a vision on paper, put it on the fridge, you will go raise your feet up and khalas, it's going to happen. No, they actually put a lot of work, right? Vision, planning, right? We need that. We need that as Muslims in our day-to-day life, in our communities, right? And we need to have a vision of being, what's the word? Influential people, okay? Because this is how they are able to support, right? This is how Israel is being supported by influential people, right? And so they're able to make an influence, whether it's through money, whether through its position, right? And so, unfortunately, as Muslims, when we move to, a lot of us who have moved to the West, we have we don't busy ourselves in the public sector. We just, doctor, engineer, cab driver, the typical jobs, and we don't get into kind of the arts. We don't get into the media. We don't get into a lot of these important roles, politics, government, right? And those are the roles that can have influence. Tamam? And the opposite, right? The Zionists, they got very involved into politics, very involved, and they have a very powerful lobby, and they have a lot of influence, right? And so, these wars are not just physical. There's a lot of things happening behind doors, and Muslims need to be a bit more involved, a bit more visionary when they think about how can I contribute? Yeah, how can I contribute? Where's the wealthy Muslims? How come we don't have a Muslim Walmart or a lot of the big corporations are not owned by Muslims. And what's interesting is that this has a huge influence on everything in the society. And look at universities. Universities, when you go to study Islam, مثلا, in UFC, for example, what do you get? You get a bunch of garbage, a bunch of biased material. I took some classes there, right? And you only have like Jewish professors teaching, Orientalists. You will never see like a Muslim person. Why? Because they're funded by them. They're funded by them, right? And so why can't a Muslim fund research in a university? Why can't Muslims fund these scholarships? And that's how you can have influence. That's a big tangent. طيب, what's the last lesson? Last lesson, I'll let you guys go, inshallah. نعم اسماعيل تفضل.
Zionists likes to kill people they don't do it.
طيب, so we can say that the Zionist movement is a very aggressive, politically aggressive movement, and like I said, I recommend you to read that book because you will see that they will do anything to achieve their goal. And I didn't mention a couple of incidents that happened, like they attacked a U.S. Marine, a U.S. battleship. It's a well-documented event. They attacked that one. They blew up a hotel what was it called? And they killed probably 20 to 30 British, right? In Palestine, right? And so they will do whatever it takes, to achieve their goal, tamam. And then, now you hear them say, the Palestinians terrorists. But in their history, it's a lot of terrorism, a lot of oppression, a lot of dhulm that has happened. طيب, we'll end there, inshallah. Barakallahu for your patience. And I think, inshallah, Sheikh Naveed will be doing the lecture next Friday, bi'idhnillah. Anybody know the topic? What's the topic? Bismillah. Yeah, it's on listening. I think it's on a book based on lessons that we can learn from the Prophet ﷺ about listening. How we can become better listeners when listening becomes hearing. It's a book by Sheikh Michael Smith, inshallah. So I encourage you all to come, inshallah. Barakallahu fikum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.